That's one small step for man,
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man.
Whether it's Columbus sailing to the New World or Lewis and Clark exploring the Louisiana Purchase, mankind has always traveled into the unknown. Many civilizations were fascinated with the moon and the stars. In 6000 BC, the Egyptian Hermetic philosophers were able to track months and seasons using the moon as a calendar. By the 1600s, Galileo was using the telescope to observe the phases of Venus. So it was only a matter of time before people were inventing ways of achieving space exploration. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, born in a rural farm village, was the father of modern spaceflight theory. In 1903, Tsiolkovsky published Investigation of Outer Space by Reaction Devices, which provided theoretical proof that spaceflight is possible and practical. Tsiolkovsky's work was followed by that of an American physicist, Robert H. Goddard, whose interest in space travel began after reading War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells when he was 16 years old in 1899, 5 years before the Wright brothers took to the skies. In 1919, Goddard publishes A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes, which proposes moonflight and outlines different possible rocket designs. In 1937, 8 years before Goddard died, he was able to launch a rocket 2,740 meters into the air. Goddard once said, "It is often proved true that the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow." This holds true with space travel, because though people have dreamed of spaceflight for centuries, it was not until recently that it has become a reality.
By the late 1930s, the German scientists had already started creating rockets inspired by Hermann Oberth, a German physicist and engineer. Oberth's apprentice, Werner von Braun, was responsible for pre-war rocket development in Germany and eventually created the V2 rocket. These rockets were 14 meters high, which is about 46 feet, and were very heavy, weighing over 20,000 pounds. V2 rockets were launched in 1944 against England, killing thousands and leaving thousands wounded. The rocket attack lasted until March of 1945, and thousands of missiles were launched. Hitler thought he could win the war by launching enough missiles, but for the Nazis, it was too late. Once World War II ended, the Cold War rivalries were causing advancements in rocketry. Ballistic missiles were being developed by the US and Soviet Union to be more accurate and larger. A Soviet missile named the R-7 was modified to carry Sputnik 1, a beach ball-sized satellite that weighed 183.9 pounds. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik 1, marking the start of the space age and the space race between the US and the USSR. On January 31, 1958, the United States launched their first satellite, Explorer 1. Less than a year after Sputnik 1 was launched by the USSR, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was created.
The great thing about the space program was that it was a great way to develop advanced technology in a variety of different areas, not just electronics, but also mechanics.
In the beginning of 1961, both the US and USSR planned to put men in space, and the USSR was first. On April 12, 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. In order to achieve this, many innovations in technology were made.
Well, virtually all of the advanced electronics and technology we take for granted today, like our cell phones and our video recorders that we're talking into right now, were essentially a direct offshoot of the technology developed for the space program.
Yuri Gagarin wore an SK-1 pressure suit. Without this spacesuit, he would have become unconscious in 15 seconds due to lack of oxygen, and his blood would have boiled due to the lack in air pressure. Rockets needed to be modified to carry humans safely at a speed of up to 17,000 miles per hour. John F. Kennedy gives a speech at Rice University on September 12, 1961.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
This speech was an important event because the President of the United States declared that his country will travel to the moon before the end of the decade, a feat that the cosmonauts had not achieved yet.
About 5 months after JFK's motivating speech, on February 20th, 1962, John Glenn orbits the Earth 3 times, becoming the first American in orbit. By now, this space race was in full throttle, and both countries were determined to be the first to the moon. On March 1965, Alexei Leonov leaves the Voskhod spacecraft on the first spacewalk. Just a few months later, Edward White II performs the first American spacewalk. In 1966, the Soviet Union launches Luna, a space probe that orbits around the moon, and the Americans launch Surveyor 1, an unmanned spacecraft that lands on the moon and transmits photography and data back to Earth.
Apollo 8 completes the first manned orbit of the moon. Frank Borman commands the mission. July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 begins its journey to the moon.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
4 days later, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong become the first men to walk on the moon, signifying the victory of the United States in the race to the moon against the Soviet Union.
As Kennedy said, we will make it to the moon in this decade, and of course he wasn't around to see it, but in 1969, a lunar landing module built here on Long Island by Grumman Corporation landed on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The future of flight essentially is going to be a continuation of those types of missions. We do have plans of going back to the moon and on to Mars with manned flight. We've had a number of very successful missions to Mars that were not manned and developed a great deal of information through those missions.
It has been 40 years since this great achievement, and what kind of impact does it have on us today? Innovations of technology. Though we are not living on Mars or the moon, our lives are affected every day in some way because of this race to the moon. When you look at your quartz clock, or using your computer to go on Facebook, or even drinking a soda, you are using technology from space exploration.
One of the big improvements in terms of the political relationships of the nations of the world is the fact that there was a great deal of cooperation amongst nations. Even during the Cold War, when there was this big competition between Russia or the Soviet Union and the United States, there was a tremendous amount of participation with our enemies and our allies in terms of developing the advanced technologies.
Space travel has led to collaboration between countries, which results in new technology to make space exploration easier and safer. Space programs have become more accessible to other countries, which in turn will make goals such as reaching Mars and colonizing on the moon a worldwide effort.
Currently, India, China, Japan, and of course Europe, in addition to Russia, are all developing space programs. So I would say the future of spaceflight is very bright.
Not only is space travel an innovation that changed the world, it is also considered by Stephen Hawking to be necessary in the next 1,000 years for humankind to survive. In conclusion, space exploration has had a strong impact on the world, and as long as NASA and other space programs are around, you can expect more innovations to come.
From space, you don't see any borders. You really don't see where United States ends and then Mexico starts. You feel yourself part of humankind, not just man from one country, one city.